Today we're making some Santas. These are made of cotton quilt batting on an armature of pipe cleaners. At the end of the video, I will share a few different variations, including how to make them in color and change the details of the costumes. I will have supply kits available in my shop at smilemercantile.com, and I'll include a little booklet with all of the instructions written out step by step, as well as a template for the armature. And if you are going to be out shopping for your own quilt batting, just be sure to check the back of the package to make sure that it is 100% cotton. Some brands will include a scrim on the back of the cotton, which is not cotton. It is usually made out of plastic, and that is something we don't want for this project. The faces that I'm using today are made of cardstock, and what I like about these is that they are small. These are, the face portion is a little less than an inch. A good rule of thumb is to make a figure that's about 4 or 5 times the length of the face that you're using. So if you're shopping for vintage scraps, just keep that in mind, that determines how long your body is. Each figure takes 3 pipe cleaners that are 6 inches in length. These are cotton pipe cleaners, which are a little bit skinnier than the standard craft pipe cleaner. We're going to start by twisting the top 1/2 inch together. And then this little template is handy for referring to for size and keeping the figure in scale. Then the 3rd pipe cleaner is laid on top, and each one of the others gets wrapped around once to make shoulders. And then these get twisted together to make the torso. And I'm giving about 4 or 5 twists, and I will compare it with my little template to see how I'm doing in terms of length. And I need to add, I think, 1 more twist. I'm bending in the hips, and then I can fold back the limbs to be the right length. I will have this template available at smilemercantile.com in the tutorial library, and all of my templates are free. It's just a PDF that you can download and print out. Before applying the cotton, you need to decide what kind of binding medium you are going to use. Either a watered down glue mixture will work fine, or a cornstarch mixture. Both of these have their own benefits. Glue is easier to mix and it dries faster. I prefer using starch because it's all natural and it leaves the cotton with a soft texture. It becomes part of the piece. And it's also the more traditional binder for spun cotton. To make a glue mixture, use 1 part PVA glue or Elmer's glue and mix that with 4 to 5 parts water. For the cornstarch mixture, start by bringing 1 cup of water up to a simmer in a small pot on the stovetop. Mix 1 tablespoon of cornstarch with a little bit of water to make a slurry. Add the slurry to the simmering water 1 spoonful at a time, stirring in between each addition. Once it has all been added, let it come back up to a simmer and just stir it for 1 to 2 minutes. The mixture should be smooth and still dribble off the end of the spoon. Remove it from the heat and let it come back to room temperature. Okay, we are ready to work with our cotton. The first thing we need to do is tear 4 strips of cotton for the hands and feet, and each of these should be about 1 inch wide by 3 inches long. It's important to tear these pieces instead of cutting so that we have the feathered edges for blending. To wrap a limb, I'm going to set the armature on top of a strip of cotton about 3/4 of an inch from the end, and then I will wrap over the end to secure it. That allows you to wrap pretty tightly, and I'm going to wrap all the way just past the end, and then there will be a little tuft of cotton that I can tuck in before wrapping up the other direction. And I will wrap until I run out of cotton, and the little fluffy bits at the end can just be smoothed against the surface with your fingers. Now it's a good idea to pick a direction for which way you're going to be wrapping your cotton and then stick to it each time. That way you'll always know which direction the cotton was put on in case you need to smooth something out or tighten something up before putting on your starch. In this case, I am wrapping away from myself, so I always know that piece is wrapped counterclockwise. So now that all the limbs have been wrapped, it's time to apply a light layer of your binding medium to the outside. And I'm just going to apply it with a brush and then use my fingers to smooth out any lumps or bumps and to make sure that the ends of the cotton have been pasted down. This will keep everything all together. When you are using pipe cleaners for an armature, it's important to not saturate the cotton with your binding medium because pipe cleaners can rust if they get wet. I will oftentimes use aluminum armature wire instead of pipe cleaners because it doesn't rust, but these shouldn't be a problem as long as you keep your medium on the outside of the cotton. You can also find different ways to speed up the drying time of your pieces. I keep a dehumidifier in my studio and we'll just flip that on, or you can set your piece near a heater vent. At this point, it's a good time to go ahead and bend the little feet. So I'm just pinching at the ankle and bending, and then I will lay this on a plate or in a cup to dry. So now we're getting ready to make the sleeves and pant legs. And to do that, I'm going to start with a long strip of cotton that is about 3 inches wide. And from that, I will tear 4 rectangles. For the pant leg, I need a rectangle that is 2.5 inches long by the 3 inches wide. And I will use this piece to make another one that matches it in size for the other pant leg. And for the sleeves, I want a rectangle that is 2 inches wide. And I'll make a matching piece for that. Now this is the pant leg rectangle, and I am going to brush some starch on the lower edge and fold it up to make a nice finished seam at the bottom of the leg. So I'm just folding it up, and I will press it lightly and then just stick it down. So there is my pant leg with the finished edge ready to wrap onto the leg. And it should just about fit the length of the leg. So I'll wrap in the end of the strip. And the part that I had folded was on the inside of the ankle there. And my goal this time around is to make these legs as cylindrical as possible. So I'm just trying to keep it even as I wrap. And these little fluffy bits I will smooth down against the surface. Now I'm putting on the second pant leg before starching the first, so that if I need to make any adjustments, I can do that. It is very difficult to adjust the size or shape of something once the starch has been applied. So it's easier to leave it in its fluffy state and then just put a coating on when you're happy with how it looks. Now I have an opportunity to compare the legs and smooth out any imperfections or even out the shape of the pants. And when I'm ready, I can apply the starch and they will stay put. Before the pants have a chance to dry, the legs can be posed. I am just bringing them back to a neutral position, and that is how they will dry. I'm moving on to the sleeves now, and I'm going to position this so that his hand will just stick out the lower edge. Next, we're going to use some strips of cotton to fill out the head and torso. For the head, we need a strip about 1 inch wide by about 6 inches long. And this I'm just going to wrap around the head. This is not going to show at all, so it doesn't need to be done very neatly. Now for the torso, I'm using a piece of cotton that's about 3 inches wide by 6 inches long, and I'm going to fold this in half lengthwise. With the folded side facing up, I'm going to start on the front of the figure and wrap it right around under the armpits. Now you could vary the size of this piece if you would prefer a more portly Santa. You can adjust the shape by adjusting how much cotton you're wrapping around. It is finally time to attach the face, and I am just using a little white glue to stick this on. Now that he has a face, we're going to take a little strip of cotton and craft his hood for his coat. For this, we will need a 1.5 inch by 3 inch piece of cotton. I am going to start by finishing one of the edges. This will be the edge that's wrapped around his face. And I'm going to position it centered on the top of his head and a little bit forward. And I'm going to attach the hood one side at a time. So I'm just going to focus on the right side first. So once I get the front of this arranged, I'm going to flip it over and attach just this first side. Now for the second side, I'm going to overlap it at the back, and that will naturally create a hood shape. I'll just press those feathered edges against the side of the head, and then the whole hood is going to get a coat of starch, and that will help hold everything in place. I usually like to just let the hood decide how it wants to be, if it wants to stick up straight, if it wants to flop over to one side. At this point, when it's completely starched, you can fold it if you'd like to maybe add a pom-pom. We are ready to make his coat, and for this we need a piece that's about 3 by 5 inches. I'll start with the piece of cotton on the front, and looking at where the feathered edges hit, it should be right about at the shoulders and just around to the side. You can smooth these down, don't worry too much about how it looks. And then I'm going to wrap around to the back and do the same. When you get around to the armpits, you might need to tear a little slit just so you can continue wrapping around. And when you make your way to the front, you have a choice to make of how to finish the coat. You can continue wrapping it around to make a seamless coat, or you can fold the edge under at the front to make it look as if the coat opens at the front. And that is what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to brush starch against my hand since it's easier than laying it down on my plate. And I will judge where I need to fold in that edge to make it look like the front of the coat. I can see I have a little bit of an overlap issue here, so I'm going to fix that. Now once that looks good, I'm actually going to glue this in place, just a little white glue on the inside to hold it. Now the shoulders in this design will be covered by a shawl collar, so I'm not worried too much about how the seams look, but I will make sure everything is pasted down. So I'm using my starch and I'm going to go over the whole coat. This is the time to start getting the arms positioned where we want them to be. I'm going to start at the shoulders, imagining that there is a joint there, and bring the arms down from that point. Then I will add a little starch back to the sleeves because those pieces have dried by now. And so once they're moistened again, I can go ahead and bend the arms and get a nice little crease in the cotton. Up until now, all of our cotton pieces have been torn instead of cut. But at this point, we can start using scissors to cut little pieces of trim. You can make fur trim for the coat around the arms and legs, or make a piece of fur that runs down the front of a coat. Right now I am making a shawl collar, and I can adjust that while it's on the figure. I can cut this to fit the Santa. And these pieces can be just tacked in place with a little bit of glue and then brushed with starch, and they look like they're part of the costume. I have these teeny tiny Dresden stars that I'm going to use for buttons. You could add painted details at this point, maybe a little bit of glitter. And I always like my figures to be holding some sort of trinket, so I have a tiny little present here that I made. It's just a piece of chipboard wrapped in scrapbook paper. To finish this piece, I'm going to add a loop of button thread, and that will turn this into an ornament. If you stick a needle through the top of the hood and let it dangle, you can see if it hangs straight or crooked. And by moving the needle, you can find that center point so that your ornament hangs straight down. Then I'm just going to pull some thread through and knot it to make a loop. Now let's look at some variations. So to make a seamless coat, instead of folding it over at the front, I'm just continuing the coat piece around to the back and smoothing it against his side. And once this is pasted in place, it looks like one piece. And so if you're going to add a lot of trimming to the coat, this is a good option. To decorate his coat, I'm adding some strips of fur along the front and lower hem. And I'm making a little cape that I folded over at the top before gluing it in place, and it makes a lapel. Now let's make some in color. I am using RIT dye to dye the cotton before I use it. Cotton batting dyes quite well. It's sturdier than it looks. For this bowl of hot water, I'm using about 1/4 of the bottle of dye. And I cut the batting into a manageable sized piece, fold it up loosely, and then before I stick it in the dye, I just run it under the tap until it is fully saturated. Squeeze out the water, and that helps the dye seep into the batting. All in all, I leave the cotton in the dye for about 15 minutes, agitating almost the whole time to make sure that I'm getting it into every little fold and wrinkle. And then I will just rinse it until the water runs clear. Squeeze out the water and hang it on the line to dry. Using the dyed batting works exactly the same way. You will notice when you apply the starch that the color becomes a little bit blotchy, but this is just when it's wet. When it dries, it looks beautiful and uniform. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed this project.